Welcome, Megan. It's very nice
Hi.
to have you here. So we are today on our fourth Critical Bodies in Conversation event. And so we started this with the with the COVID-19 pandemic. And since we are at home, we actually decided to take this opportunity to explore how around the globe, how different activists, grassroots, any type of organizations are actually using sports and body movement as a tool for social change. And so yourself, you are working in Iraqi Kurdistan, and you've been using sports quite widely, and we'll be talking about this. I just want to maybe just talk about the ground rules as every time, and they are also now written on the right side on the chat box. But if you are connecting in the Zoom, we will ask you to don't open your cameras unless you want to ask a question. If you want to ask your question, you can write it on the comments side, on the chat box in the Zoom, or also on the Facebook, because we have our moderators who are also watching at this. And we can have the people to ask themselves the questions, or I will be here asking questions to Megan if I see them written on the side. And other than this, I forgot to mention also last time that we are organizing this with online seminars, which is a platform for South-to-South knowledge sharing, and that is aiming at making seminars accessible for all. And so we are partnering together as Bomovu with online seminars for organizing those. So welcome again, Megan. It's very nice to be with you today.
Thank you for having me.
I just wanted to, as I told you just before we went online, I wanted to really mention the fact that we have very poor relations in terms of civil society among our both countries, in Iraqi Kurdistan and in Turkey, mainly in the west of Turkey, because we are in Istanbul here. And so I think it's a great opportunity to, of course, speak about how sports is a tool for social change, especially in conflict-affected areas and communities. But also today is a bit more special, I think, because we have this, we are creating now a bridge that doesn't really exist. So I think this is a first step, and I hope we will have long-term relations and talk more about many other things we have to share.
Definitely,
So,
I hope so too.
Yeah, if you want to just maybe start to introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Megan. I have been working in the Kurdistan region of Iraq for a little over 5 years now. I started out working with big organizations. I worked with a university, the local university there, and eventually ended up starting an organization there called Youth Speak. And that's the organization that we've done sports programming through. We've also done some arts and culture programming, and they're all aimed at adolescents. So usually between the ages of like 15 on the low end to 25 on the higher end.
Great. So, I mean, before we enter in the subject of your work, can you tell us a bit about the context and about the situation? So you're based in Duhok?
Yeah.
So
yep. So Duhok borders Syria. It also borders Mosul. So in the last 5 years, little over 5 years now with the Syrian civil war, Duhok has been the recipient of the largest number of Syrian refugees, not just in the Kurdistan region, but in Iraq, like all of federal Iraq, just because of its proximity to the border. It also, because of its proximity to Mosul, has received the largest number of IDPs, displaced Iraqis from Mosul city and from Sinjar mountain, where people were fleeing from Daesh, from ISIS. So the city of Duhok itself is quite small, but the number of displaced people that have lived there have really grown the city and changed the dynamics of the city a lot in the last 5 to 10 years. So now we have the city itself, and then surrounding the city, there are probably 6 to 8 either IDP camps or refugee camps within a 30-minute drive of the city center. And then within the governorate overall, there are, I think, 27 camps right now that are home to either Syrian refugees or displaced Iraqis who have had to flee conflict.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose that most of this population, or at least the half, usually is children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a large number of children. I would say over half are children or adolescents.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. As I said, if there are questions in between that people want to ask, they can jump in. So yeah, I wanted to create Youth Speak. I mean, what's the needs that you see emerging in this situation, and if you can tell us about your mission as an organization, and what are your main activities?
Yeah, so we started as an organization about a little over a year ago, probably about a year and a half ago, doing programming inside of Duhok and in the surrounding areas. And the goal behind it really came from the experiences that I had had working with other organizations and working with universities, where I really saw that there were a lot of young people in the community who had really incredible ideas for how to address the conflicts that they saw in their communities, how to address the challenges that they saw. And when they would approach organizations, they just kept hearing back like, oh, that doesn't fit into our program goals. That's not one of our budgeted activities. We can't support you with that. And so eventually, or if they would agree to support them, then it would come along with branding all of the activities as the NGO's activities. And sort of taking them over, inviting their own volunteers and sort of making it their activity rather than the activity of the young people themselves. And so the idea was to start an organization that really focused on young people as possible change makers and really support them in their ideas for improving their communities and addressing issues and conflicts in their communities. So some of the projects that we've done, because of that, we don't have one mechanism we use because it depends on what the young people themselves are looking for. And so some of the programs have been using sports as a way to develop community activism skills and access to public spaces and gender equity. Some of it has been using art or using literature, or we do book exchanges and poetry events and all of those kinds of things as a response to what the young people in the community ask for and are looking for.
That's great. So actually you serve as a kind of a platform for young people who want to work for their own community and who have great ideas, and you're kind of a push factor.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Right. And then the school systems in Iraq, and maybe more specifically in the Kurdistan region, because they've changed a lot over the years, really foster sort of individual competition between people and foster kind of an attitude of mistrust between young people. And so one of the things that we try to work on is building more of a community spirit between people so that they can share their ideas freely and feel supported and feel like people will help one another within the community that we're helping to build. So part of supporting them and helping pushing them along, we also try to help build those teamwork skills and those sort of soft skills that allow them to be stronger community activists.
Great. So you have this project that especially is attracting our attention, I think, for today, is this bicycle project. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so the biking project, it actually started when I was having dinner with a group of young women that volunteer with us, and so I was just having them over for dinner at my house. And one of them had studied abroad, and she was talking about how wonderful it was when she was outside of the region to be able to ride a bicycle. And so I started asking her, you know, what prevented her from riding a bicycle into Hook.
Mm.
And it was several things. In the local culture, bikes are typically assumed to be something that poor people use. So there's a socioeconomic status with it. It's something that children use. So there's an age discrimination thing with it, and it's something that boys do. And so there's a gender issue with it as well. And in addition to that, it's really hard. Young women in particular are usually not very economically independent in the Kurdistan region. And so it's most of them, a decent number of women do work outside the home, but a decent number don't also. And so to ask for money to buy a bike, which is a fairly large purchase that your family has no reason to suspect you'll ride more than once or twice, is kind of asking for a lot. And so when we were talking about it and sort of thinking through how we could address those barriers, they said that if we could just organize these group activities, if it could just be not one person who is the weirdo doing this strange thing outside of the cultural norms, but if we could do these group events, then we can change the culture and attitude toward biking in the city. And so we ended up training a little over 100 young women from, some of them came from the IDP camps and refugee camps, some of them from the host community, but they all trained together. So because it's something for children, most of the young women hadn't ridden a bike since they were probably 10. And we're just feeling a little wobbly about jumping back on a bike. So we did trainings for them to help them feel more comfortable and safe, and then organized large citywide biking events where we brought all of these young women, invited the public, and biked together on pre-laid out routes. And then since then, we still have the bikes that we bought for this project. And so the bikes are just available to be checked out, and people in the community can just use them to organize their own biking events, to just go biking with a friend, to just have access to them, to be able to engage with biking as a mode of transportation or as an enjoyable activity, without having the barrier of needing to buy a bike.
Mm-hmm. So did many women from the refugee camps around also join in this bicycle event?
Yeah, one of the things that we found that was really, really interesting is that within Syrian culture, biking is actually pretty common, and it's common for men and women and boys and girls. And so a lot of the Syrian refugee women already knew how to bike and were quite confident, and didn't have the same social pressures not to participate in an event like that the host community had. And actually the same went for some of the displaced Iraqis who had come from bigger cities like Mosul, where biking was more commonplace. And so actually what we saw was that they were able to, because of their experiences, and because how different their background was with biking, with the local host community, that even though it's fairly common for the host community to kind of think of them as, the poor refugees and the poor IDPs, that they had an opportunity then to change and adapt and support the local host community to improve and to take on this new activity that they weren't otherwise doing. And so it was a really cool exchange that we got to see between the different communities, where it really allowed the displaced communities to shine and show light and show opportunities to the local host community.
Great. Do you have any example in mind? I don't know. Well, it's a bit out of the blue question right now, but like somebody who would express how how it impacted them, or this?
Yeah, actually, and this is separate from our project. This was independent youth initiative, but there's a group in Duhok called Let's Keep It Green that started, and it was founded by three IDP men from Mosul, young men. They were university student age, and they started this group just to promote biking as a form of transportation, as a form of environmental justice, and improving access to the universities, and decreasing traffic and decreasing pollution. And what sort of started out to them as this thing that was really focused on the environment, more and more they had the young women who participated in our biking program and young women on the university campus approaching them and saying that they wanted to join and they wanted to participate. And so just as volunteers, they took time, they taught young women how to ride bikes if they didn't know how to. They organized events for them. They talked about how they could make the universities more bike friendly. So they installed bike posts to lock your bike up outside of the university buildings so that it was accessible for people, and started meeting with teachers and finding people who might be willing to support and might be willing to set an example. And so now some of the University of Duhok university teachers bike to and from the university now as well, and have joined them in this project. And so that was a really cool initiative because it was designed by IDP youth and gave them an opportunity to create this club that, you know, they post pictures of their bike rides, and they've biked up to Zaho, which is by car, it's about a 40-minute drive. So it's not a short bike ride. So they organized trips like that around the city as well. And that was just something that they did as a passion project for them.
Well, actually, bike is such a tool for so many things, you know, like cultural tour, especially I would say in conflict affected areas where the cultural heritage is also in danger. That, you know, like, yeah, bike is also a way to make again those, you know, like this heritage life again. That's, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say, last summer in Duhok, we had two young Iranians who had biked from Iran, from Tehran, through Suleimania, down to Erbil, up to Duhok. And when they left, while they were there, they gave a presentation about biking as a form of exploring cultural heritage to the young men and women who were interested in biking in Duhok that we had worked with. And then they were continuing on actually into Turkey. And so when they left, they were headed up to Zaho to cross the border and come into Turkey. So it's definitely, it creates opportunities for people to see and experience cultural heritage sites without causing harm or damage to them, and to engage with other cultures and other communities. So
that's great. It sounds like usually you would have stories like this, but it's people from the West going to the East and they go into the discovery and so on.
Exactly, yeah. And the Kurdistan region of Iraq is really unique because it is very, it's very stable. It doesn't have a lot of ongoing conflict the way that, like, when people think of Iraq, they think about all of that active conflict. The Kurdistan region is impacted by conflict because that's where the displacement has come into because of its relative stability. But because of that, you do actually get some of the like Western like war tourists who are coming through and like acting like they're doing something to help when really they're just coming and, you know, backpacking through or whatever on their way out. So
yeah, and
we do get those people too.
The bikes, okay, that's nice too.
Sort of.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, more broadly, what do you think that in the very situation of communities who run away from conflict, who have survived conflict, what do you think sports brings to them?
I think a lot of it is a regained sense of control and a regained sense of, especially with the conflict with ISIS and the displacement out of Sinjar and out of Mosul, particularly for young women, there were a lot who had experienced physical and sexual trauma. And so to have the opportunity to participate in sports oftentimes gives them just a new sense of owning their own body and being in control of their own body and building strength and building confidence in themselves. And I think that in and of itself is a really incredibly powerful opportunity for them to sort of familiarize themselves with and feel more in control of their surroundings. And I also think in like biking activities, one of the things that was really interesting about it was that it allowed them to reclaim not just personal autonomy over their bodies, but access to public spaces. It allowed them to reclaim, you know, the streets as spaces that they got to be out in and be a part of and be active in and be seen without it being something that was shameful or distasteful or without that mistrust between communities. And I think that that's one of the other things that sports is really beautiful in, is because it's designed to foster a sense of teamwork. It helps to break down the cultural differences and tribal differences and language differences and all of these sort of barriers that exist, especially when you're in your adolescence, that you sort of look for ways to divide people up. And it's a way that really brings people together and brings different communities together and allows them to bond over something and build a common ground and a common foundation for a broader sense of community than just me versus them.
I was also thinking that, you know, migration and running away from war-torn lands is like you need to run to be in a safe place, but on the same time it's very hard to access some place, and then you have to end up in a camp if you're lucky, but there is all those borders and everything that is actually related again to the conflict that is always stopping you. And the fact that, you know, this is a means of transportation.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
so you gain back
Absolutely.
your freedom of movement.
Yeah, the freedom of movement aspect of it is huge, and the ability to move and to be honest, the ability to move outside of the you know, strict street lines where the checkpoints are set up. That, you know, I mean, I heard stories of and have friends who, because they were displaced, would walk the distance, and they would go the long way around where they would not hit checkpoints because they knew that if they did, they would be turned back, just because overflow to the system, if they're coming, you know, from internal to Iraq, and even if they're coming from Syria, then you have a physical country border between them. And so that land border crossing is really difficult, and the official way in is often not the fastest way in for people. And when they're fleeing for their lives, it gives them a freedom of movement and an ability to move in different pathways. So definitely.
Yeah. So we could say like there's this kind of personal way of empowering. Maybe you didn't use that word, but I think, but I would use it. I think, and
Definitely.
So it's empowering personally in the idea that this person has the ability back again to move, to move across places and to move, as you said, actually out of the lines that are designed for it. And you talked about that gender perspective, how it helped young women and girls to again, go out of the box that is designed for them.
Mm-hmm.
And you talked about this thing that it's uniting people. How is the situation with cultural identities and I mean, do you have example from those bicycle race events?
Yeah, so one of the things that was really interesting was that when we first started, we all sort of assumed that the easiest community to get on board, because it was relatively common for them in their home country, would be the Syrian refugee girls. And they actually ended up being one of the hardest groups to recruit participants from. And so, we sat with them and talked with them, and we're trying to just figure out why and what the barriers were for them. And finally, one of the young women said, we don't, Dahukis look at us like we do things wrong, and we don't want the men here looking at us while we ride bikes. And so we sort of set up the training program to be a space that was enclosed so that they wouldn't, there wouldn't be outside people being able to come and see them as they practiced. And what ended up happening was we were able to, with that reassurance and telling them, you can participate in the public event or not. It's not mandatory. It's totally optional. So you're welcome to come if you'd like, and we'll make sure that it's, safe and secure. And they came, and young women from the host community, from the local community, came as well. And what we ended up seeing was that the Syrian girls were giving advice and giving support and helping the host community, the young women from the host community, as they practiced their biking. And they, on the day of the event, because of reassurances from the host community girls, came and participated. And at the end of it, all of the girls who had trained together from the refugee camp and from the nearby host community were all from the same town. And so they were exchanging phone numbers and getting contact information. And we had kind of like a party at the end of like the first event. And they kept saying like, no, we're not ready to go back. We're not ready to leave. We're not ready to go away, because they didn't know when the next time they would get to see their friends were, because they had this training experience in common and had really built kind of a community unto themselves as they learned and practiced biking together and supporting each other and teaching each other. And so they were able to help the local girls with like the actual physical technique of biking. And then the local girls were able to offer them sort of a sense of reassurance that they could come and participate in this big event and feel safe. And in the end, yeah, they are still friends and still keep in contact. So
that's great.
Mm-hmm.
You also have a boxing project?
Yeah, so there's an organization called Free to Run that they work in Erbil, which is another governorate in the Kurdistan region, and they also work in Afghanistan. And so we've partnered up with them, and we're doing boxing programming. We had all of the materials that were donated to us, and zero boxing expertise. So what had been sort of us just having YouTube videos and, having the materials and space for any of the girls who wanted to, or anybody who wanted to sort of play around on it, but no real concrete skills or information of how to go about this, we were able to partner up with Free to Run, and they've done boxing programming in Afghanistan, where they focused on survivors of domestic abuse there, and they worked within a shelter and did boxing programming there. And so in Dahuk, it's not nearly so focused. It's not specifically on survivors of domestic abuse, but yeah, we have a boxing program then for women and it's really interesting because again, it really is something that empowers and strengthens and makes people feel a lot more in control of themselves and their space and their bodies and the ability to say no. And so even though it doesn't specifically target survivors of domestic abuse or domestic violence, it makes perfect sense that it also leads to healthier relationships and more consensual relationships as they sort of have that ownership and that ability to determine the boundaries for their bodies and
to express it, right?
And to express it, yeah, exactly.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Do we have any questions in the group? We have some participants here on Zoom. I'm checking on the Facebook. We don't have any questions, I think. Is there anything you want to speak about specifically?
I have one question.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm very happy to hear all you did in the project, both in biking and also your plans about boxing. It is really great. I really liked all the dimensions you mentioned about it, the self-control and the mobility of women by with this. So the cultural interaction. Could you hear me? Did you
I lost you for a second, and now you're back.
Okay. This is because of my internet connection. It's like that always. Sorry for that. Okay. And I really liked it. I just want to ask, is it possible to hear these women voices in a YouTube video or in a report? I wonder how they say about their experience with biking.
Yeah, we do have a report. We don't. There is a YouTube video somewhere.
Okay.
There's a news article as well. It would take me a little bit of time to pull it up, but there's a news article and a short video and interview with some of the participants. If you, I think
I saw it.
Okay.
Yeah.
It will be great if Neil can send us the link. Then
absolutely.
Thank you.
If I can pull it up here.
And you know, from the woman history, the biking has a really symbolic value.
Yeah, absolutely.
In woman movement, and it's also great from that point of view too. It's a powerful image. Thank you.
Yes, that is the article. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Faster than I was. Yeah, it was interesting so we ended up for that project, we ended up partnering with IOM and their psychosocial department to help scale the project and be able to reach as many women as we did. And when I was first talking to someone from IOM about the project, that connection between biking and the women's movement was the very first thing that she mentioned, and how biking has always been so deeply tied to women's liberation and women's rights movements. And so definitely that is absolutely a pattern that hopefully we are continuing.
Yeah, it's so powerful and inspiring. Great. Oh, I think we lost Ilknur. We have other questions.
I have a question. Maybe I can also start
Please.
my video so you can see me.
Sure.
Thanks for this nice conversation. I really enjoyed the live. I want to ask, the riding bicycle for kids, it's like one of the first things that we feel free, like we are not controlled by our parents or our relatives, etc. So I want to ask how these riding bicycles affected young people in terms of developing new ideas to improve their communities. And I have another question, but maybe I can ask that one later.
Sure. Yeah, so part of all of the programming that we do with my organization, we try to build community organizing and community activism skills along the way. And so a number of the young women who participated in that biking project have remained as volunteers with our organization and have designed women's rights campaigns that they have launched themselves. One group of volunteers, they organized for International Women's Day, they organized signs and photos and poems by women and art by women and put them up all around their university. And they were local examples, they were regional examples, they were examples from the West. But they really wanted to sort of take the opportunity and take International Women's Day as an opportunity to share back to their communities and really push for the idea of gender equity. One of the volunteers that I work with, she made a sign for her kitchen and put it up above the sink that said, if you really want to support gender equality, please wash your own dishes. And started to push back even in her family life about that sort of expectation that at the end of the day, the women clean up everything and dry it all and put it all away, that it's actually what they live in within their family is a community, and that part of the way that you contribute to your community is by taking responsibility for yourself. So those are just a couple of examples that come off the top of my head.
Can I ask another question there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
So the way you start the program also remind me of some of the movies that were shot in Middle East. Actually, that was also the theme was, women were riding bicycles. So I just wanted to say that it also, I think there is a desire to ride bicycles again, especially for women. So
Mm-hmm.
there's some there's history, I think, in Middle East in terms of riding bicycles on or with relation to women liberation, I would say. Lastly, I want to ask about how these programs and activities affected or contributed to resiliency of adolescents after their displacements from their own communities. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I know. First, I think I know what movie you're talking about. I just saw it on the internet the other day and was planning on watching it this weekend. But in terms of building resilience, one of the things that really comes out when you talk to young people who are sort of recently displaced or who have really been sort of stuck within their own communities, within the camps, is the sense of isolation, the sense that they can't connect with or relate to the local community. They're separate, they are looked down upon. There's an expression in Kurdish that I don't know, but it translates to secondhand Kurd, and it's how the local community that grew up in Kurdish-speaking schools refers to Kurds who have grown up in like Syria, where they speak Arabic in school, but also places like Mosul, which are Arab majority and speak Arabic in schools. And so there's this sense of tension that exists between young adolescents in the community and this sort of othering that happens, and it really leaves people feeling really socially isolated and like they don't fit in. And one of the best ways that I've seen that the project builds resilience is to really give them a sense of belonging. So a sense that they're not secondhand, they're not second-class citizens, they are as much a part of the community, and the community is continuing to change. The community isn't a static thing. It continues to change as new people come, and the culture changes as new cultures are introduced, and that's a positive thing. It gives people a sense that they can give back, they can improve the community, and it also gives a sense that they are a part of the community. They don't get that when they are in the camps and not interacting with people from the host community. They feel, living oftentimes in tents, maybe containers, depending on, how nice the camp is. And the Syrian refugees by now have started to build houses. But living in the camp environment, it doesn't make you feel like a part of the whole community. It makes you feel isolated and separate. So one of the ways that it really helps to build resilience is to connect people across groups and across communities.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We have a question that I'm going to read for you from Nazlı, who says she can't open her microphone. So she says, thank you, it's really inspiring, and I'm wondering how young women describe their feelings after the activity. So I guess that here we are talking about really like raw feelings right after the activity. And I was thinking, just before we got connected online, you were telling how your house was on the middle of the hill, and so it's among the mountains. And so I guess that bicycling, around mountains and hills is quite tiring.
It's incredibly tiring, yes. But the nice thing is that to get to the city is the downhill. So when you're going, it's the coming home that's hard. I remember sitting at one of the training sessions that we had, and I was just kind of there to help out and add an extra set of hands and make sure that everybody had bikes, and the bikes had tires and their first aid kits and all of that sort of logistical stuff. And so I was sitting and working on some paperwork, and I ended up just putting it away and stopping and watching, because it was like shrieking and giggling was like the sound. It sounded, even though they were in their late teens to early 20s, they sounded like young children playing, like just the sheer joy that bubbled up out of them and how proud they were. And for the girls that were struggling, when they finally got it, everybody would start cheering, and there was just this like really raw joy and sense of like uninhibited, it's a culture that typically young women are taught to be modest, and they're taught to sort of laugh softly and talk quietly, and so to have a community where like this community within this training center where they got to just like shriek and giggle and yell and cheer and make all sorts of loud noises, it really was like like raw emotion pouring out of them. Raw joy and raw freedom. And yeah,
I think it's something else actually that about the outdoor sports, that you're there outside and you're having this physical experience, and especially if you're in the middle of a beautiful landscape with mountains and hills, and then it's like the nature is coming inside your own body, and you're it's kind of a different experience. I can totally relate to that.
Definitely.
Yeah, nice. And we had information from Ilknur about the movie, one of the movies about,
Awesome.
yeah, the day I became a woman from Neshkini. So, yeah, I'm just looking if we have any other questions or people who want to participate, people who want to jump in. I think we are done. Is there anything you want to share with us specifically other than this?
No, I just want to thank you guys, and it's always nice to have an opportunity, like you said, like that cultural exchange and information about what is going on in other places, especially places where relationships, geopolitical relationships are tense. It's really nice to have the opportunity just to get to share about young people really trying to improve their communities and getting to advocate for their rights and do all of the things that, you know, young women all over the world are doing. So I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's time that at least we, as on this level of, as you said, you know, like sharing this joy and this happiness, we can give a hand to each other and and grow together. Okay, so yeah, in the hope that this is a start for more.
Hopefully.
And thank you so much, Dan, for being with us today and sharing all this incredible experience. And congratulations to you and all your team.
Thank you very much.
And yeah, I mean, unfortunately, they couldn't participate in this conversation.
Yeah,
but
this time it's, I mean, I'm sure some of you know or all of you know, but because it's Ramadan and because the weather there is so hot, oftentimes people are just like, no, like until it's like solidly dark, I'm not doing work this time of year. Yeah,
so hopefully
they apologize and they're sleeping.
Well, we have always, you know, the door is always open, so
Definitely.
I'm sure, you know, like we can have create more space, and if people want to share and to join us, it will be a great pleasure.
Definitely. I'm sure that they would love to.
Great. Okay.
Right.
So thank you so much. Thanks everyone for participating.